Well, greetings, and welcome to my abode here in the high central Sea Egg Mountains. Yes. You see out that window there? I have the most glorious view. You must take my word of it, at least during the daytime, where red and white dragons can be seen flying high over the dusty peaks. Well, pardon me for not introducing myself. You see, I'm not used to having guests in my home peering at me through the looking glass that I'd only so recently manifested. And I welcome you. I do. Welcome. My name is Rije Thistlewarf, and I'm a man of inherent divination. I like to suppose a kind of bardic gumption as well. I do so like the art of telling stories. And you see, I have sequestered myself up here and far away in these mountains so that I might have the proper concentration to scry on all the greatest adventures being had in the known lands, our lands of Akalos, as you know, our great continent. I've recorded all of them right here in this very book, Tome of Tales. If you'd like to stay a while and listen, perhaps I can tell you one of them. Maybe one of the oldest and perhaps even the most fabled of them all. What do you say? Yes? Well, wonderful. Well then, my friend, sit back, enjoy perhaps a stein of brew or char drink, whatever your drink is, I care not, as long as you are relaxed. This is the tale of Skaho Academy. It is a bright spring day in the heart of Roak, where several longtime friends and colleagues meet for a spring festival. Bands serenade the grand city center with the hums of hurdy-gurdy melodies and the plucking of lute strings. Doru, the monk of Wilmar Lake, Jin, the sorcerer of a rare wild magic bloodline, and Olgor, the humble druid, begin clacking down the cobblestones towards Ubi's flower stand, the morning sun still stretching out its rays to embrace the day. The three lads are each a member of the Explorers Guild and have only been on one expedition together, the mapping of an undiscovered island, where they encountered at first very little aside from a multitude of flower fields and sought distant breezes, though they later came into possession of a magic lamp that they found sitting precariously on a stone fence surrounding an abandoned hovel. Upon touching the lamp, a genie emerged and demanded they solve his riddle before he summoned something from another dimension. If they solve it, he shall become their servant. If they don't solve it in time, then this beast shall emerge to make short work of the four of them.
I want to be standing next to you. I pine as you walk away from me. What am I?
Thankfully, they guessed right. A tree. They also encountered a field set aflame by a strange living fire, that of which they were quick to withdraw from, several owl bears that ambushed them while they slept, and a giant octopus that threatened to sink their ship as they sailed around the coast. Olgor, the druid, came close to meeting his maker in this unfortunate encounter, when a tentacle sailed across the deck to knock him overboard and unconscious into the water. It was only after Giareth, their orc friend, had jumped into the ocean and pulled him to the deck to play his chest-like tribal war drums that he was greeted once again with the light of day.
Whatever happened to that old barbarian Giareth?
Asked Doru, his purple headband billowing in a sudden gust of wind. Jin shrugged and Olgor answered. Last I heard of him, he said he was returning home to his tribe in Oatland to tell tales of his grand expedition to his folk in Keen.
Yes.
Continued Doru.
Well, I hope he had a safe journey home.
They were finally at Ubi's flower stand, and the short rock gnome greeted them with the warm glee that of both a child and an old man.
I heard your stories, friends.
The gnome spoke.
This Gyar sounds like quite a formidable warrior. I hope one day to set sail on such a spectacular adventure, but lo, I must attend my apprenticeship here in Roak.
Yes, Ubi.
spoke Doru.
It is not easy for such a free man as yourself to land an apprenticeship for one of the greatest wizards in the known land.
Ubi bobbled his head like a toy.
You're absolutely right. Archmage Thursett is a genius in the ways of Arcana. It's just so much bookkeeping and transcriptions. I can't wait to do some fieldwork one of these days.
Your day will come, Ubi, spoke Ulgor as he inspected his wares, finally coming across a bundle of toad roses. I'll take these. Ubi smiled gleefully. As he was packing up the roses, a bugle sounded from behind them as a balding man in yellow garments came hurriedly into the town center as if he were an overconfident bard about ready to play a ballad, but lo, he had no instrument. I, Somred, bring news of a dim sort and call to arms all who would aid. The man carried on breathlessly about strange and horrible beasts that had been emerging from the marshlands of Skaho, abducting citizens and ambushing town patrols. Skaho, spoke Ulgor. Giarth would have to pass through there to return home to Oldland.
Pray he is well.
Muttered Doru. Somrad continued to tell harrowing tales of the Skaho's horrors. He did not know where they were coming from, but somewhere deep in the Skaho's swamps. He was finally able to catch his breath and utter some last few words. There is gold aplenty for any of those who discover the source of this problem and can eliminate it. Though this task is not for the faint of heart, I call for skilled freelancers, adventurers, and champions alike. Skilled, you say? Said a tall man in white and green robes, stepping into the city center, as if he too were beginning to prepare a ballad for all of those around. My good Somred of the southern swamps, you can trust in my skills alone to extract this mystery from beyond your fears. His words carried a great deal of poetry ripe with bombast. No beast on this mortal realm have not humbled themselves before the art of my hymns and ballads. He withdrew and brandished the most fancy rapier Doru, Jin, nor Ulgur had ever seen, and fewer yet have come back from the touch of my blade. Somrad nodded. He seemed to be quite taken by the man's haughty display. Come to our aid then, good sir, but beware. The name's Sereth, the man said, testing the sharpness of his blade with his thumb. Right, Sereth. Somrad continued. All of those who wish to proceed into Skaho, I can map the way. For those of you who know the land, make your way to the central town of Tushasu. There you may speak with Tusk, the town overlord, for further details about the reward.
Gold aplenty,
Spoke Doru, shifting an inviting glance back towards his friends. Jin nodded and Ulgur answered. I do like the sound of that. The journey took many a day and near a fortnight, traveling south out of Roak and then southeast through the golden floral countryside of Hest. Eventually they passed the great fortress city of Beltsmine, built into the western cliffs of the Ettering Mountains, and descended into Skaho. Beneath its dark canopy, they went following a muddy road with only the faint flickering of torchlight that they feared could go out at any minute due to the constant drizzle that dripped from the trees. The men passed several groups of mercenaries as they crossed the bridge into the town of Tushasu. The small town was not walled but surrounded by an erection of stakes and an outer moat. The place appeared to be in a severe state of overpopulation and squalor. Coughing and retching made up its song. The street had become muddy from rain and it now drenched them as they walked. Soft lantern lights led the way like giant caged fireflies flickering within their confines. And a great big tower stood in the center of the town, burning with an ever greater flame just above the swampy canopy.
so that's why they are called the Lanterns of Skaho,
Muttered Doru. Before long they were speaking with Tusk the Overlord in his abode. His face seemed to be permanently molded in a grimace as he briefed them on all of the matter at hand. He told them of the casualties the town had sustained so far, not only from the mutated creatures of the swamps that were abducting and killing at will, but also from a plague known as Murophoises that had swept through the region, devastating to Shasu and several other outlying towns. His scouts had recently informed him on new information on the suspected origin of these strange beasts. An old temple known as Skaho. Its purpose had always been kept a secret even when it was functional, but those who lived nearby had often reported seeing magicians and wizard folk alike coming in and out of it. I fear these strange malevolent nightmares have been bred and born of magic, so gird your loins and be on your guard. And what kind of creatures be these? Asked old Boar.
Yes.
Continued Doru.
Have any yet lived to tell the tale of what they've seen?
Few, replied Tusk. He continued to describe accounts of those who had been attacked by ape-like creatures with bright yellow eyes, seen a giant behemoth frog dwelling near the sewers of the temple, and a bright light that shone in a lake whose lure was irresistible to any who gazed upon it. The party held back their fear from the Overlord and agreed to head out and investigate the temple. The three men trudged through bog and marsh and darkness for several hours until before long they made out a shrill shriek like that of a wounded crow. They followed the sound until they came across a giant spiderweb. Someone familiar was stuck in it and shouting frantically as a giant spider was tying him up. "That's Sereth," uttered old Gore. Doru exhaled and applied his bladed guitars.
Well, let's get him out then.
The party engaged the spider, Jin firing firebolt after firebolt to burn the web, and once the spider was on the ground, it was Doru and Olgur who engaged it in gripping melee combat. Before long, another spider descended from the canopy above them to assist its kin. It landed right on Olgur and began tying him up with its web. Jin tossed flame after flame at the giant arachnid. They seemed to be doing nothing but singe the hairs on its thick carapace. "Jin, help!" Ulgor shouted as a venomous drip from the beast's fangs splatted beside him. Jin was terrified, and he gathered all the energy within him, his arms spasming uncontrollably as he released a beam of fire out towards the spider, utterly incinerating it. Jin could not stop himself, though. His hands flailed wildly as the unceasing flaming beams took control of his body. He was finally able to extinguish them, but not after a beam of fire had come dangerously close to igniting Olgur, while he still lay wrapped in the web. Doru severed another leg from the other spider, and then delivered the finishing blow right into its multi-eyed, blinking head. The spider wheezed its death rattle and fell limp to the ground. Doru cut Olgur from the web.
What happened, Jin?
Doru and Olgur stood up and looked at him. Jin shook his head before finally speaking. "I lost control." His hood had dropped amidst the combat, and so Doru and Olgur were once again greeted with the visage of their friend, his milky eyes contrasting the smut-like darkness of his complexion, and ears that drooped to the side of his head like a mangy dog. He was a tiefling. Olgur and Doru were once again met with the fact that their friend was an outlander from the plane of shadow, and there was still plenty of mystery behind the eyes of their shy friend. "I can't lose control." Sereth cut the remaining webs off him and showed a brief nod of gratitude. Olgur approached him. "You're welcome to stick with us, Sereth, if it seems traveling alone nearly caught you in a death sentence." "You know me?" "Right. You're that same lot from all the way back in Roak." "Yes, well, we best keep moving, boys. There's a great wallowing beast nearby, and I'd prefer not to stick around for lunch." Doru gave a regretful grimace, but knowing that sticking together meant a better chance at not getting eaten, he ultimately allowed the new member into the group. The party of four now continued on through the jungle. Rain poured on and off as the gods of this region couldn't make up their minds on the weather. After crossing a narrow brook and getting snapped up by the gavial that occupied it, they soon came to a fearful realization. "We're lost," uttered Sereth, with an impatient tone in his voice. Yet not a moment later did they come across a rock cairn trail marker. "Serendipity," breathed Jin. The topmost stacked rock had a crude pinwheel of animal appendages carved on it. The bird's leg carving, pointing behind them, was illuminated in a soft, pulsating turquoise. Perhaps it's pointing in the direction of the talons, spoke Olgor, rubbing his chin. Perhaps, uttered Sareth with a cocked eyebrow. It is clearly indicating that direction. We've surely passed the temple. Jin raised a finger to point briefly in the opposite direction, and Doru meditated in deep thought on the matter himself. The talons of the birdfoot carving did appear to be pointing that direction if reading the carving like a standard clock. Onwards, travelers. You stay put too long, you get eaten by the next monster to lay eyes on you.
Walk too fast and you get caught in a web,
muttered Doru under his breath. Though devoid of a better idea, Doru gestured for Jin and Olgor to follow.
Keep your distance,
spoke the monk, looking up in the direction of Sareth, who was already bushwhacking through some shrubs.
Lead the way, your majesty,
hollered Doru, careful not to raise his voice too much. Olgor chortled to himself, and Jin mimicked him. Well, it wasn't long carving through brush that the party began hearing a violent rustling and tromping nearby. The adventurers withdrew their weapons and readied for several long seconds before a pale-looking dwarf and high elf emerged. They recoiled in fright at the sight of the four.
Dear goodness, you nearly scared the lights out of me,
bellowed the dwarf in a deep yet somehow raspy voice.
I thought you were a swamp beast right ready to rip the flesh from my frame.
The two settled down, but the high elf refused to sheath his rapier.
We thought the same of you,
added Doru.
Now tell us, have you made any progress in finding the temple?
Asked Doru, assuming their business.
What temple?
Asked the dwarf. The high elf scanned from person to person, never lingering for more than a second on each of them.
The Temple of Skaho. It be a place of mystery, even to the locals, but it is said to be a nexus from mages and priests and druids alike. Rumor has it that that's where all these strange creatures have been coming from. Well, we haven't seen anything yet.
Going the wrong way, then. Only marsh and reed for miles that way. We've come from the caverns of Nor and only looking for a town to seek shelter. If there was any such temple, we certainly would have seen it.
The party turned scornful gazes back to Sareth. Well, maybe it's underwater. Gamel might have sunk into this blasted swamp. Doru shook his head.
Might I introduce myself?
Uttered the dwarf.
Seems a less than pleasant place. I've stolen my pleasantries. My name is Marsh.
The rest exchanged introductions amongst each other, all except for the elf. He remained stoic and quiet. They eventually decided to all group together, that they would just try to return to Tushasu for the night, and having a dry night's sleep could regroup with a fresh mind in the morning. After more walking, the group came to yet another mysterious trail marker with the same clock-like carving on it. On this one, a webbed hand was illuminated.
Back this way. Perhaps it is telling us how to get back to Skaho.
Jin held up his finger once more as if being charmed by something. He pointed in the exact opposite direction of the webbed hand. No, spoke the elf, who still refused to give his name. It's a compass oriented in Sylvic. He pointed in the direction Jin still had his finger in. The direction is indicated not from elbow to hand, but hand to elbow. The tiefling's right. That way. The party continued for another 20 minutes until coming to a small clearing where in the center stood a small stone pylon, a jade statuette of a fat goblinoid creature sitting upon it. Sareth moved into the clearing to inspect it, and Olgor stayed close behind him, urging him to be cautious of it. It's a deity, spoke Jin. Doru nervously tightened his fists and scanned around him.
Deity of whom?
Sareth reached out his hands to the pure jade statue. This may well be worth more than what that lowly freeman Somred has to offer. Against Ulgor's beckoning, Sareth lifted the grotesquely obese statue from its seat. Calm yourselves. You must have forgotten you were Sareth the Great. A deep warbling sound began to emanate from the jade statue. And I do feel ever great. I feel mighty power with him. The ability to control every aspect of my destiny. And I do not fear. A churning sound came from the idol as it spat acid onto Sarah's neck and face. He screamed and fell to the ground. All of the party except for Jin and Doru rushed to his aid. Olgur began channeling a kind of innate sap from his palms and rubbing it all over Sarah's face in attempts to neutralize the acid. Doru could see that Jin was swiveling his head all about, as if following a mosquito that was flying around him. Doru clenched his fists until they were ripe with blood.
What is it, Jin?
Jin stopped gazing around and stared straight. They're coming. Bushes began to rustle all around them, and before they knew it, the party was surrounded by tiny pygmy humanoids, blowing poison darts and attempting to rend their ankles with sickles before disappearing back into the underbrush. The scattered party attempted to defend themselves however they could. Maris waved his billhook all about the perimeter to keep the enemy at bay, while the elf slashed at every sound that managed to scurry past his fence. Olgur used his ability to manipulate earth. He raised and hurled boulders aimlessly into the underbrush. Doru, having thankfully not been seen by the shrunken head-like visages of their ambushers, waited until he saw one of the pygmies raising up to aim a blow dart at Olgur. He leapt forth with his guitars and cut the pygmy clear in two. Jin summoned a layer of black clouds that descended over the group, concealing they who had become trapped and surrounded in the clearing. Doru slashed apart another pygmy, and suddenly the rest began to scamper back into the jungle. Before long, the sharp squeaks had all but completely dissipated. Only a low gurgling sound remained, transmitted from somewhere beyond. There must have been more than a dozen of them. How would they give up the fight this easily? Said Olgur.
Something scared him off,
Came the grim reply from the dwarf, adrenaline still tremoring through his hands. Doru looked behind him to discover that Jin had vanished. The behemoth frog, whispered the elf. Hide. The gurgling sounds soon grew louder and guttural, like a giant churning stomach. While Sareth still lay on the ground rubbing his eyes, the rest of the party stealthed into the surrounding undergrowth. Sareth, whispered Olgur, gesturing him into his hiding spot. But Sareth could not hear him over his own grumbling, nor could he see due to the acid having partially blinded him. Where have you gone? He yelled, feeling with his hands for something to grab onto. A great branch cracked right next to Olgur, and he looked up to see the towering yellow beast emerge from the mist. It headed right for Sareth, who scrambled to get away from the great beast, but lo, it was too late. It had seen him. Sarah's scream was cut short as a great big tongue lashed forth to swallow him whole. The lumbering beast let out another digestive sound and then carried on into the swamp. The party, still in shock, quickly and quietly decided to head in the opposite direction of the giant frog. Maris grabbed one of the blowguns that the pygmies had been using and then followed them. Jin, like a wisp of cloud, emerged from his hiding place, that of which none of the others knew of, and walked out into the clearing. He gazed down at the lifeless idol, transfixed by its squinting eyes that beckoned. He bent over and stashed it away in his bag before continuing after his companions. And thus concludes the first portion of this story, Skaho Academy.